Welcome, the anointed ones. History doesn't expose injustice immediately. It exposes it when the silence finally becomes embarrassing. There comes a moment when a community suddenly acts shocked, outraged, and demanding answers, not because something new happened, but because what always happened can no longer be hidden without looking guilty. That's the moment we're in right now. The noise you're hearing isn't confusion. It's discomfort. It's the sound of people realizing that what was done to one person was quietly approved by many, and now the approval is coming back with receipts. Here's a fact most people don't like to sit with. Abuse that happens in plain sight almost always survives longer than abuse done in secret. Not because it's worse, but because it gets normalized. When harm is dressed up as discipline, tough love, character building, or just how things are done, entire communities can watch it unfold and still sleep well at night. Until they can't. Until the person who was supposed to be erased is still standing, still sane, still speaking, and still refusing to carry shame that never belonged to them. That's when outrage suddenly becomes fashionable. Now everyone wants answers. Everyone wants explanations. Everyone wants to act like this came out of nowhere, like it wasn't tolerated, excused, minimized, and quietly defended for far too long. It's almost impressive how fast people can switch from "this is fine" to "how was this ever allowed?" The same mouths, the same rooms, different tone. And let's be honest for a second. Some of this outrage isn't moral awakening. It's fear. Fear that what was done looks bad now. Fear that silence is starting to look like endorsement. Fear that if this gets examined too closely, names, roles, and decisions might start surfacing. Accountability has a funny way of making people suddenly very emotional about things they previously ignored. There's also a strange, almost uncomfortable humor in it all. The person who was treated like a problem turned out to be the proof. The one they thought would break became the evidence. And now the community's pacing around like someone just moved the furniture and revealed a stain everyone pretended not to see. This isn't a story about sympathy. It's about exposure. It's about a collective realization that something was allowed that should never have been okay, and the unease that comes when the truth refuses to stay buried. Number 1. What happened to you wasn't private suffering. It was a public moral failure. What was done to you wasn't just some personal tragedy hidden in the corners of life. It wasn't something that only touched you and then quietly disappeared. Every action, every decision, every justification that allowed this to happen carried the fingerprints of a larger system. People who watched, people who nodded silently, people who said nothing because it was easier to look the other way. It wasn't just a personal failing in someone's character. It was a societal failing, a moral failure with witnesses. The outrage we see now isn't shock at the act itself. It's the shock that people are finally forced to see it for what it truly was, preventable, obvious, and wrong. The truth is, what happened to you became normalized because those around you, the people in positions to intervene or speak up, treated your suffering like it was nobody's business. They allowed cruelty to wear the mask of necessity. They pretended compliance was consent and silence was agreement. And for too long, it worked. The world outside may have looked away, thinking it was a private matter or that you were overreacting, while the reality was that you were being failed by the very structures that were supposed to protect you. It wasn't just wrong for you. It was a collective failing. Now the outrage comes because the illusion is gone. People are finally seeing the layers of responsibility, the way comfort and convenience often outweigh basic human decency, and it's unbearable for them to watch. They're realizing this wasn't just your burden, it was theirs too, and seeing you survive, seeing you remain whole despite being treated as expendable, forces a confrontation with that truth. It's not easy to accept that a moral failure isn't hidden in the past. It's present, and it implicates everyone who stayed quiet. The anger that rises in the community isn't just about the injustice itself. It's about the collective realization that wrongdoing doesn't need to be secret to be wrong. The fact that it happened openly and was tolerated by so many makes it far worse. And now, finally, the world sees the magnitude of that failure. It's not just your story. It's a mirror reflecting how easily people fail each other when convenience outweighs courage. Number 2. The community isn't shocked by the abuse. They're shocked it didn't break you. The truth that stuns people the most isn't that you were hurt. It's that you survived in full, unshaken, and unapologetic. From the moment the first wrong was done, the unspoken assumption was that you would bend, break, or vanish under the weight of it all. That assumption shaped every cruel word, every act of manipulation, every attempt to control and diminish you. They treated you as if your humanity was negotiable, as if your mind, your spirit, your very sense of self was something that could be tested, reshaped, or destroyed. And for a long time, it worked in their eyes, because people believed that no one could endure what you endured and remain intact. The shock now comes because the rules they relied on to keep you in a box failed. You didn't crumble. You didn't apologize for being yourself. You didn't let their abuse redefine who you were. And that is terrifying for the very people who thought they were in control. The community sees someone who was supposed to be a victim, someone who should have carried the scars as proof of their suffering, standing tall instead, calm and composed. That unshakable presence forces them to confront a truth they weren't prepared to face, that their cruelty wasn't about justice, necessity, or even correction. It was about power. When they realize you aren't broken, the whole narrative they constructed falls apart. Their outrage isn't moral, it's existential. The people who orchestrated or condoned the abuse are forced to acknowledge that their judgment, their schemes, and their assumptions were flawed. And the wider community, the witnesses who stayed quiet, suddenly feels the weight of their inaction. Their collective shock is not just about what happened. It's about the audacity of your resilience. What they now call surprising is what you always knew about yourself, that suffering doesn't define you unless you allow it to. Your endurance rewrites the story they wanted to tell, exposes the lies they depended on, and forces the world to face the uncomfortable reality that not everyone crumbles under pressure. And that is why their outrage is so loud. It's not your pain they're processing, it's the fact that you refuse to be their proof of defeat. Number 3, you were used as a social experiment, not treated as a human being. From the very beginning, what happened to you was never about fairness, care, or understanding. Every action taken against you was calculated, measured, and tested as if you were a variable in someone else's experiment. People treated your life, your emotions, and your very existence like data points to see how far they could push someone before they cracked. Every humiliation, every manipulation, every boundary crossed was a test of endurance, obedience, and submission. And the truly shocking part is how casually they justified it to themselves, as if curiosity and control could replace conscience. This wasn't private suffering. It was a study in human limits, a cruel demonstration of power disguised as necessity. They weren't concerned with you as a person. They were focused on the outcome of the trial. They measured your reactions, weighed your responses, and catalogued your resilience like it was part of a report that mattered more than your dignity. The emotional, mental, and spiritual cost you bore was never theirs to carry. It was simply the price of their curiosity. The community's outrage today comes from realizing the scale of this moral blindness. People are shocked not only that this kind of behavior could happen, but that someone dared to use a human being as if they were an experiment. The horror is compounded by the fact that you survived it, still standing, still clear-minded, still unbroken. Your existence exposes the ugliness of treating someone as less than human, the arrogance of assuming one life can be dissected for amusement, control, or validation. What makes this even more striking is that many of the same people who witnessed your treatment, or even participated in it, thought they were clever, untouchable, or justified. The experimenters didn't account for one critical factor: you are not a lab rat, you are not disposable, you are living proof that human strength, spirit, and integrity cannot be measured, controlled, or owned. And now, the community is forced to reckon with that fact, their outrage fueled not just by what was done, but by the undeniable truth that the experiment failed to produce what they expected, because you were never theirs to manipulate in the first place. Number 4. The outrage exists because your treatment set a dangerous precedent. What happened to you wasn't just a singular injustice. It was a blueprint, a message quietly sent to anyone paying attention, that certain people can be mistreated, dismissed, or dehumanized, and the system will look the other way. That's what makes this so infuriating for the community now. They're not just angry at the act itself. They're angry because your treatment revealed a pattern that could and would repeat if left unchecked. It's the realization that this wasn't an isolated incident, but a standard others might be forced to endure under similar circumstances, and that is terrifying to people once they finally connect the dots. Your experience exposed the truth about human behavior under convenience and comfort. Those who perpetrated or allowed harm assumed that compliance, silence, and fear could guarantee invisibility for their actions. They assumed that no one would notice, and if someone did, it would be easier to blame the victim than confront the wrongdoing. The outrage we see now isn't just about accountability. It's about the reckoning that comes when people realize a precedent has been set and they can't ignore it anymore. The anger is amplified because the precedent threatens everyone. Once people see that injustice can be tolerated under the guise of control, tradition, or authority, it challenges their sense of safety and fairness. The community isn't just concerned about what happened to you. They're suddenly aware that anyone could be next if this example isn't condemned, if this system isn't corrected, if this standard isn't overturned. And that's what makes the shock so intense, the realization that harm was normalized and that the world could continue to function as if it were acceptable. The truth is, your endurance and survival now serve as a countermeasure. You became the living proof that this treatment is intolerable, that it cannot be repeated without consequence, and that people are capable of recognizing wrong when it's laid bare. The outrage isn't random. It's a collective defense mechanism, a mix of fear, guilt, and the desperate need to prevent history from repeating itself. Your story set the line, and now everyone can see exactly where it was crossed. Number 5. The system assumed you would never be believed, remembered, or defended. From the very beginning, those who orchestrated or allowed what happened to you were banking on one thing: that your voice would be ignored, your story dismissed, and your existence conveniently forgotten. They assumed that no one would step forward, that no one would connect the dots, and that the weight of truth could be buried under excuses, lies, and indifference. Every cruel act, every violation was calculated around that assumption. They didn't just want to harm you, they wanted to make sure that the harm was invisible, unchallengeable, and permanent in the minds of others. This assumption is what makes the current outrage so sharp and undeniable. People are shocked not only because of what was done, but because the strategy they relied on has failed spectacularly. You survived with clarity and presence. You retained your integrity when everyone expected you to crumble. You became a living record of everything they hoped would be forgotten, the very thing they thought they could erase. Your story, your credibility, your essence, is now the catalyst for confrontation, accountability, and collective anger. The system's miscalculation lies in the belief that silence equals submission. They assumed compliance would be automatic if fear was applied consistently enough. They counted on social norms, institutional hierarchies, and human reluctance to interfere as shields to their actions. But what they underestimated was the truth you carried, the internal clarity, the persistence, and the refusal to let their narrative overwrite reality. Your survival dismantled the protective illusion they built around their cruelty. Now, the community is forced to grapple with that failure. They are seeing clearly how easily institutions and social structures can enable wrongdoing when they assume someone cannot be defended or believed. Your story exposes not only the cruelty, but the arrogance of this assumption. The outrage isn't just moral, it's the recognition that the world had underestimated the power of someone who refuses to be erased, someone who remains a witness to their own life, someone who proves that truth cannot be locked away, silenced, or ignored. Your presence alone challenges everything they took for granted, and that is why the anger now feels explosive, uncontainable, and absolutely justified. Number 6. Your mistreatment was justified through labels instead of truth. From the very beginning, the story they told about you wasn't based on reality. It was built on convenient labels, assumptions, and distorted narratives that suited their agenda. They didn't need the truth. They needed a justification. Whether it was calling you difficult, too sensitive, rebellious, or ungrateful, every label was carefully chosen to make your suffering seem deserved, your voice irrelevant, and your humanity negotiable. The cruelty wasn't raw or unplanned. It was packaged, rationalized, and sold to themselves and others as if it were reasonable. The power of these labels is subtle, yet devastating. They shift perception, they silence witnesses, and they turn public opinion against the very person being harmed. Once a label sticks, the truth becomes invisible. Actions that would normally provoke outrage are suddenly framed as acceptable responses to a problem that exists only in the mind of those applying the label. That's why the community's current shock and anger are so raw. They're realizing just how easily reality was twisted to serve convenience, and that the harm you endured was never about who you actually were. The danger of this approach is that it allows people to absolve themselves of guilt. By reducing a person to a label, they believe that any harm inflicted is corrective, necessary, or even deserved. In reality, it's a smokescreen. The truth is ignored, the person's experience erased, and accountability disappears. And yet, despite all of this, you survived. You didn't become the label. You didn't internalize their narrative. You remained grounded in your reality, fully aware that the version of you they wanted the world to believe in was a lie. Now the outrage is focused not just on what was done to you, but on the audacity of using falsehoods as justification. People are angry because the truth has been standing there all along, patiently waiting to be recognized, while labels were used to cover shameful actions. The intensity of this anger comes from a collective realization. The cruelty wasn't accidental, and it wasn't about you. It was about the ease of bending reality to protect their own comfort, power, and convenience. And the fact that you didn't break under it exposes every lie they counted on. Number 7. You were punished for not fitting into a role that benefited others. From the start, what was done to you wasn't about correction or fairness. It was about control. The people around you had a script, a role they wanted you to play, and anything that didn't fit into that script became a problem. And problems, in their eyes, needed to be disciplined. You weren't punished because you were weak, careless, or unworthy. You were punished because your authenticity, your independence, or your refusal to conform threatened the comfort, convenience, or agenda of others. They needed a version of you that could be managed, contained, and used to reinforce their own sense of order. You refused to fit. and that refusal became the crime. The subtlety of this kind of punishment makes it even more insidious. It wasn't always loud or obvious. Often it was strategic. A cold shoulder, a snide remark, a false accusation, a withheld opportunity. Each act was calculated to remind you that deviation from their expectations carried consequences. The system they created was not about justice, it was about obedience. And when you didn't obey, when you didn't shrink into the role they carved out for you, the backlash was swift and relentless. The outrage we see now comes from the recognition of that truth. People are not just angry about the punishment itself, but about the reason behind it, the cruelty of targeting someone for refusing to be molded into something they weren't. They are realizing that the injustice wasn't random, and it wasn't justified. It was opportunistic, self-serving, and deeply unfair. You were penalized for daring to exist outside of someone else's expectations, for refusing to be a convenient version of yourself, and for showing the world that identity cannot be dictated by someone else's comfort. Your survival and integrity in the face of this kind of targeted control is what fuels the current outrage. The community sees now that the punishment wasn't about improvement, it was about power, and your refusal to conform exposed their manipulation, their hypocrisy, and their inability to tolerate truth. That is why the anger is so intense. Because it's no longer possible to pretend that what happened to you was deserved, acceptable, or isolated. It was a deliberate act of control, and your strength has made everyone confront it. Number 8, the bystanders are angrier than the perpetrators, and that matters. It's strange how outrage works. Often the people who did the harm feel a kind of defensive discomfort, maybe even embarrassment, but it's usually muted, calculated, or carefully hidden. The real fire comes from those who watched, those who stayed silent, those who let it happen without lifting a finger. The bystanders, the ones who believed staying quiet was safer than intervening, are the ones now pacing, shaking their heads, and shouting at the walls of their own conscience. Their anger is louder, sharper, and far more telling than the anger of the perpetrators, because they are finally forced to confront their own complicity. These are the people who, for whatever reason, chose convenience over courage. They saw injustice, yet calculated that silence would protect them. They witnessed cruelty and rationalized it as necessary or deserved. They assumed someone else would step in, or that the harm wasn't their responsibility. And now, as the truth becomes undeniable, their outrage is raw because it's self-directed. They are furious not just at what was done to you, but at the part of themselves that allowed it to happen. That kind of anger is volatile. It's guilt mixed with helplessness, regret, and shame. It burns hotter than simple blame because it's impossible to dismiss. What makes this even more compelling is that your survival forces them to face it. You are standing proof that the harm could have been stopped, that their inaction mattered, and that their silence contributed to the suffering they can no longer deny. The perpetrators may feel embarrassed or threatened, but the bystanders feel exposed, morally naked, and caught in the middle of a truth they hoped to avoid. Their anger is louder because it's layered with accountability, something they never expected to confront. And that matters because it shifts the narrative. It changes the focus from your survival as a lone story to your survival as a mirror reflecting the moral failures of everyone involved. The intensity of their outrage underscores the depth of your endurance, the injustice of the situation, and the uncomfortable reality that witnessing evil without action makes anyone complicit. Their anger isn't just noise, it's a confession, a delayed recognition, and a societal jolt that reveals who truly stood for what was right and who chose comfort over courage. Number 9. What was done to you violated unspoken social contracts. What happened to you wasn't just unfair or cruel. It broke rules that everyone pretends are inviolable, rules people believe exist even when no one writes them down. There are basic social understandings about how humans treat each other, lines that shouldn't be crossed if society wants to function. These unspoken contracts aren't laws on paper, but they are the glue that keeps trust, decency, and accountability intact. When someone steps outside of those boundaries and harms another person, it shakes the foundation everyone relies on, whether they realize it or not. That's why the outrage we see now is so intense. It isn't just anger at the act itself, it's anger at the fact that something sacred was violated. You were supposed to be protected by these invisible agreements, to be treated with fairness, to be heard, to be given the benefit of the doubt. Instead, every action taken against you demonstrated that those contracts could be ignored when it was convenient for others. The people responsible, and the ones who stayed silent, acted as if those rules didn't matter. They tested boundaries that shouldn't have been tested, and in doing so, they revealed how fragile social agreements can be when personal interest outweighs integrity. What was shocking to the community wasn't just the cruelty, it was the brazenness of violating norms everyone pretends to honor. Your survival and clarity made this violation undeniable. People are angry because they now see the full picture. These weren't isolated incidents or personal misunderstandings. They were breaches of trust that affect everyone. By enduring, you've exposed the fragility of these unspoken contracts, the extent to which some people will ignore them, and the real cost of that ignorance. The intensity of the community's response isn't just moral indignation. It's a recognition that social cohesion depends on respecting boundaries, even the invisible ones. Your story reminds them that when these contracts are broken, everyone loses something. And that's why what was done to you resonates far beyond your own life. It challenges the sense of justice, fairness, and accountability that everyone depends on, but often takes for granted. Number 10. You carried consequences that were never yours to bear. The weight you carried wasn't yours. Every mistake, every flaw, every act of cruelty aimed at you was justified by those around you as if it was somehow your responsibility to absorb it, fix it, or endure it silently. You were made to feel accountable for things that never belonged to you, and for years that burden became a quiet prison. The injustice isn't just in the harm itself, it's in the fact that the responsibility for wrongdoing, failure, and manipulation was dumped squarely on your shoulders. And what makes it even more outrageous is that the people who imposed it assumed it would stay hidden, as if shifting blame could erase their own moral failure. People are outraged now because they see just how unfair it was. They're recognizing that someone's suffering was weaponized to protect others from accountability. You were punished for things that weren't yours, expected to apologize for actions you didn't take, and treated as if the chaos around you was a reflection of your character. The reality is stark. You were never the problem, but the system, the people orchestrating it, needed you to appear as one. They counted on your endurance as a shield for their own guilt. And yet, you survived. You bore what wasn't yours and refused to let it define you. That refusal is what shocks people now, and it fuels the outrage. They are angry because what was done was not only unjust, but strategically cruel, and they can see that clearly through your resilience. The longer the community observes, the more they realize that the harm wasn't accidental, and the unfair responsibility you carried was deliberate. It was meant to isolate you, weaken you, and convince everyone, including yourself, that the fault was yours to bear. Your endurance exposes the lie. The consequences were never yours, and yet you carried them with a strength and dignity that forced others to confront their moral failures. That realization hits harder than any act of cruelty because it shows the deliberate misplacement of blame, the calculated manipulation, and the courage it took to survive without absorbing the guilt that wasn't yours. And that is why the outrage is so powerful. It's not just anger at the harm, it's anger at the audacity of shifting responsibility onto someone who didn't deserve it. Number 11. Your endurance removed their ability to deny harm. One of the most powerful things you did, often without anyone realizing it, was simply keep going. By surviving, by staying present, by refusing to disappear into shame or defeat, you removed the very thing that made injustice easy to ignore: ambiguity. The people who caused your suffering relied on the idea that harm could be denied, minimized, or dismissed. They depended on a narrative where your voice would be silenced, your story erased, or your pain rendered invisible. They counted on time, distance, and silence to bury the truth, but your endurance shattered that plan. Every day you continued, every act of resilience was a living testament that what happened was real and consequential. You didn't just survive the cruelty, you remained undeniable evidence of it. That reality is what fuels the community's outrage now. The anger isn't just moral, it's strategic. People see that the perpetrators no longer have the comfort of plausible deniability. They can no longer hide behind excuses, reinterpret events, or manipulate perceptions without the glaring presence of someone who lived through it and refuses to be diminished. Your clarity and composure amplify the impact even further. It's one thing to survive, it's another to do so with the ability to articulate, reflect, and stand firmly in the truth of what happened. The endurance you displayed removes all gray areas, all chances for self-deception or collective rationalization. The community sees the injustice for what it is because you refuse to allow it to be hidden. You forced acknowledgement, accountability, and confrontation simply by being yourself and refusing to collapse under the weight of what was done. The outrage now is a direct response to this undeniable presence. It is a recognition that harm cannot remain secret when the one harmed refuses to be erased. Your endurance is a mirror showing everyone the cruelty, the manipulation, and the audacity of those who acted against you. It is proof that surviving is itself a form of resistance, a refusal to let others rewrite reality, and a statement that truth has a way of surfacing no matter how carefully it is buried. Number 12. The outrage is delayed because comfort lasted longer than conscience. What's happening now isn't just anger at injustice, it's a reckoning for everyone who chose ease over action for far too long. For years, those who could have intervened, spoken up, or questioned what was happening to you, opted for comfort instead. They calculated that staying silent, looking the other way, or convincing themselves it wasn't their problem was safer, easier, and more convenient. It's astonishing how often people prioritize convenience over morality, and even more astonishing how long it takes before that moral cost becomes unbearable. The delay in outrage isn't accidental. It's the natural consequence of comfort overshadowing conscience. People are furious now because they finally have no choice but to confront the truth. The harm done to you is undeniable, your survival undeniable, and their inaction undeniable. The delay only makes their anger sharper because they are not just outraged at what happened. They are enraged at themselves for allowing it to happen, for hiding behind excuses, and for underestimating the impact of staying passive. That kind of realization is raw and uncomfortable, and it fuels a kind of fury that is more intense than the initial shock of wrongdoing. Your story exposes the fragility of moral courage when weighed against convenience. The outrage is louder now because people are grappling with guilt they could no longer ignore. They see clearly that by choosing comfort, they allowed injustice to persist, and now they are forced to face the consequences of their choices. That delayed anger is not trivial. It is evidence that your endurance, your voice, and your clarity made it impossible for anyone to maintain the illusion that what happened could be overlooked. The intensity of this delayed outrage also highlights the human tendency to defer responsibility until confronted with undeniable evidence. Your experience demonstrates that comfort can only suppress conscience for so long, and eventually the truth surfaces in a way that demands recognition. What we're witnessing is more than anger at injustice. It's the undeniable awakening of conscience long silenced by ease, now forced into a furious acknowledgement that what was allowed to happen should never have been tolerated. Number 13. Your story exposed how easily normal people accept injustice. One of the most unsettling truths your experience reveals is how quickly ordinary people can stand by and watch injustice unfold without interference. It's not that they are inherently cruel or malicious. Most of them are average, well-meaning individuals who simply chose the path of least resistance. They witness wrongdoing, but they rationalize it, minimize it, or convince themselves that it isn't their responsibility. They treat harm as if it is a spectator sport, believing that staying on the sidelines keeps them safe, unaffected, and untainted. Your story shines a harsh light on that tendency, exposing the uncomfortable fact that the line between bystander and enabler is much thinner than people like to admit. The outrage we see now is fueled by the realization that what happened to you could have been prevented at almost any point if just one person had refused to accept the narrative fed to them. But instead, convenience, fear, and the desire to avoid conflict allowed wrongdoing to continue, grow, and even flourish. Ordinary people, by failing to act, contributed to the harm as much as those who directly caused it. Your endurance and clarity make this impossible to ignore. By surviving and refusing to be redefined by their inaction, you force the community to confront how easily injustice can be normalized when people choose comfort over courage. Your story becomes a mirror, reflecting a truth many would rather avoid. That injustice doesn't need to be extraordinary to be pervasive. It can thrive quietly, invisibly, within the routines, norms, and daily decisions of normal people. The anger of the community isn't just about the harm you endured. It's about the widespread realization that passivity allows cruelty to exist, and that ordinary individuals, through silence or rationalization, can become silent partners in wrongdoing. By standing strong, you turned their complacency into a spotlight. You revealed how ordinary people can be complicit, intentionally or not, and that realization shakes the foundations of what people believe about morality, accountability, and the courage required to truly stand against injustice. The outrage is not just directed at the past, it's directed at the uncomfortable truth that your survival exposes. That acceptance of wrongdoing is far easier than confronting it, and most people take that easy route until faced with undeniable proof otherwise. Number 14. They want answers because they know it could happen again, unless your case becomes the line in the sand. What makes the outrage around your story so urgent and intense isn't just empathy or anger at wrongdoing. It's fear. Fear that what was done to you isn't an isolated incident, that the same patterns of manipulation, abuse, and silence could be repeated with someone else. People are angry because your experience revealed a blueprint of cruelty that, left unchecked, could target anyone. Your story has become more than a personal account. It's a warning, a marker showing exactly where lines were crossed and boundaries were ignored. The community recognizes that unless this moment is addressed, unless accountability is enforced, the system that allowed your suffering will remain intact, and someone else will inevitably pay the same price. That realization is terrifying for them, The outrage is not only about what happened to you, but about the uncomfortable knowledge that it was preventable, and that the failure wasn't just personal, it was structural. People are angry because the consequences of inaction are now visible, and your survival forces them to confront the reality that what happened could happen again. And that fear transforms into insistence. They want answers, explanations, and responsibility, because without them, the precedent remains, waiting for the next person to be ensnared. Your story sets the line in the sand. It establishes a boundary that cannot be crossed without consequences. The outrage is amplified because people are finally seeing that the harm done wasn't inevitable, and that accountability is the only way to prevent repetition. Your endurance, your voice, and your refusal to be silenced are now the benchmarks against which future injustice will be measured. The community's anger is focused not just on punishing past wrongdoing, but on ensuring that what happened to you is never allowed to happen again. What makes this moment so potent is that it transforms your suffering into clarity and warning. You've become the standard of truth, the living testimony of what happens when people are allowed to act without accountability, and the reason why society is forced to confront uncomfortable realities. The outrage isn't fleeting. It's a demand for permanence, a refusal to let history repeat itself, and a recognition that your story defines the line that must never be crossed again. The story we've explored here is more than just one person's journey. It's a mirror reflecting the deepest truths about human behavior, morality, and resilience. Every point we've uncovered reveals layers of complexity that go far beyond simple injustice. From the calculated cruelty disguised as necessity, to the way labels were used to justify harm, to the shocking realization that ordinary bystanders can perpetuate wrongdoing, your experience exposes a world that often chooses convenience over conscience. It's a world where silence can feel safer than speaking up, where power seeks control at the expense of truth, and where systems are structured to hide accountability until someone refuses to be broken. Your survival, your clarity, and your endurance didn't just reveal the failures of those who acted against you. They revealed the cracks in the entire system, the hidden moral compromises, and the dangerous assumptions that allowed harm to flourish. You carried consequences that weren't yours, were treated as a test subject, punished for refusing to fit into someone else's mold, and yet, despite all of that, you stood firm. That strength forces the world to confront uncomfortable truths, the audacity of injustice, the fragility of human decency, and the undeniable fact that wrongdoing cannot stay hidden when someone refuses to be silenced. The community's outrage, delayed or otherwise, is proof of the power of endurance and truth. It is the reckoning that comes when convenience loses to conscience, when survival exposes complicity, and when a single story becomes the line in the sand for everyone else. Your experience reminds us that injustice is never invisible forever, that accountability cannot be avoided indefinitely, and that the courage to endure transforms suffering into revelation. This is not just your story. It's a wake-up call for everyone who thought wrongdoing could quietly exist without challenge. If this video resonated with you, made you stop and think, or sparked a deeper awareness of what it really means to witness, endure, and confront injustice, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future content. Like this video if it opened your eyes, comment to share your thoughts and experiences. Your voice matters. And share this video with anyone who needs to understand the hidden truths about endurance, injustice, and accountability. Together, we shine a light on what was once hidden, and together, we make sure the lessons are never ignored. God bless you.